welcome back, everyone. I am excited for today's conversation with a fellow accountant and someone who is doing her best, her absolute best in terms of reframing what accountants look like. I've been seeing her on social media and she is showing how much fun accountants can actually have, and finances do not have to be boring. She's on a mission to demystify it and to empower other business owners to gain confidence in managing their finances. So, welcome to From Roots To Froots. Hi, Fi.
Hi, thank you so much for having me, Arlyne. That was such a cute intro.
No, it's true. It's true. I think there is a little bit of a misconception in terms of what accountants are like, but you're bringing fun and just color to the profession in a really, really good way. So I love seeing it. But I just wanted to ask you before we get into it, a little bit of an introduction from yourself and all the amazing work that you've been doing.
Yes, absolutely. So yeah, I'm Fi. And I think my CV/ professional background is very confusing to a lot of people. So I'll just give you the highlights. But essentially, I started my career as a chartered accountant in the city. I qualified at Deloitte, what feels like a very long time ago. I then quit to sell chicken on a market stall, is how my mum and dad described the time, which gives you an insight into how they felt about that shocking career move. Um, so I set up a Caribbean street food business in central London and had a lot of fun running that business, Lime Hut. But whilst running Lime Hut, I kept meeting really phenomenal female founders in particular who were very passionate about the product they'd created or the service they sold, but they lacked confidence when it came to tackling accounting, tax, finance, strategy, that sort of side of running the business. Um, and I realized very quickly I was taking that for granted, running my street food business as a accountant in a previous life. That was the bit that I was very good at. The bit I probably needed help with was the social media. And that was the bit that I think other businesses maybe find a lot more natural than getting to grips with their finances. So decided to set up Coco Financial with my co-founder as a safe space for underrepresented founders where there is no such thing as a silly question. And our community of small businesses refer to us affectionately as the financial fairy godmothers. So we are basically on hand to help support, propel their businesses and match them to the right experts to propel them on that journey.
Yes, that's so great. I mean, one of the biggest things that a lot of small business owners keep saying is, I'm not good at finances. And they'll have brilliant ideas, brilliant business model, but it could fail really if they're not confident managing their finances. So it's great to have services in terms of accountants that are providing a service, but they are friendly as well. So your motto of there are no silly questions, it's a great one because a lot of people, that's what's stopping them from getting accountants. So I love that. Keep the fairy godmother going. um,
Uh,
Thank you so much for sharing the origin story. And I love that you got your hands dirty in terms of going into a market and actually started selling. So that means that you understand what these business owners are going through. And I have noticed that you also talk about personal finances as well. And you want to support people around understanding how personal finances can affect their lives. It's not just around business finances. I just wanted to touch on what led you there, because that's been my journey as well. And I'm interested in what motivated yourself.
yeah, I think I just realized that personal finance is everywhere. You can't get away from it. And there is a real problem that we don't get taught any of this on the school curriculum, or at least we didn't in my day. And then at some point, you become a real adult human being that receives scary letters from Companies House or HMRC. And I just felt like there was a really big leap between never being taught anything to do with personal finance in a meaningful way that you can apply in real life, and also signing up for a student loan as a child. Like it's a personal finance decision that a lot of people make. To then, having the real ramifications and consequences of those things without any understanding. And so I got interested in helping bridge that gap. I noticed that a lot of my counterparts who had on paper, very successful jobs, very nice salaries, having no clue how to manage their finances. And I was like, this is a real problem because even some of the top earners in society have no idea what they're doing with money. So I just went on a mission to democratize personal wealth and finance, to demystify it, because I think a lot of language around it is a bit alienating. And we can just speak in plain language terms and get everybody in a better, healthier financial place. So that was the motivation, really.
Oh, brilliant. It's so true, actually, because a lot of people think that the answers to their problem is more money. And actually, it's actually managing your finances, whatever you have, better. That is the real answer. So the more you earn, if you don't improve your education, the more you're just going to spend. So that's really great. And I'm glad that Mhm. I'm glad that you've linked both of them. And I really wanted to talk to you about pension awareness because you did an amazing campaign discussing the subject. And again, you're on a mission to demystify it. Can you please share for the younger audience, maybe they're in their 20s or their 30s, why it's important for them to care about their pension?
Great question. And I think the whole reason as to why people don't care about their pensions in the first place is pensions don't sound particularly interesting. They sound really boring, and they sound like it's a problem very far away for you. But the reality is, we live in a world where people are living longer. And if you don't want to be working until your very dying days on this earth, thinking about managing and putting resources towards your pension, or at least thinking about the ways in which you're going to retire, are really, really crucial because one, pension poverty is a very real thing. Two, the state pension as we know it, and we can maybe talk about that a little bit later, may not even exist for future generations. And three, getting interested in it now in your 20s and 30s rather than 5 years before you retire is actually how you can build daily, monthly, yearly habits that give you a fantastic trajectory for a really comfortable retirement. And all the things that I know about pensions now, I wish I'd known when I was 18, because I promise you I would have been doing some very different things at an earlier stage, that's for sure.
Mhm. Yeah, you're totally right because I think the earlier you have, the less you have to contribute in terms of like monthly because you've been contributing for a longer time, so you benefit from the duration. And I think it's one of those things where younger people think that it's a tomorrow problem, but actually it's something that you can gain control of right now. So it's great that you are kind of putting that voice out there and kind of letting people know that this is really important. But to touch on, you mentioned state pension, because a few people do not know the difference between the pension that they contribute towards in the workplace and what is an actual state pension. Do you mind clarifying this?
Yeah, absolutely. And you're right. It's a really important distinction because I know a lot of very grown up, serious adults who don't even know this difference as well. And so essentially, the pension that most people become aware of during their working life is their what could be called an employer pension or a private pension. And essentially, that's the pension that you're likely to be contributing into as a proportion of your salary, making contributions towards throughout your adult working life. The state pension, however, is essentially a government pension that many working people will be eligible for when they hit, I believe the age is now 68, but I'm sure they're increasing that as the years go
It's
by.
ridiculous.
And that is based on your national insurance contributions over a 35-year working life. And so it's
Okay.
currently, it is, I believe it's around £220 a week or so. Whenever you hear people talking about the triple lock on pensions, that is specifically for the state pension. And so that is a guarantee that pensions will increase every single year by one of three metrics, things like inflation, a set percentage, that sort of thing. And you can only be eligible for the state pension if you have contributed national insurance contributions over that set period of your working life. And so it's really important for people to be aware, especially anyone that takes time out of work, particularly for childcare, other caring duties, or any moment that you take out of work where you might not be contributing with national insurance. You might want to go back and check any years that you have gaps in your national insurance records, because it might stop you from being eligible for that state pension. And that is something that trips up many people, especially women historically, who are getting to retirement age now and have perhaps, especially for that generation who are getting to retirement age now, were very likely to be the prime carer for children in a family household, and may have 5, 10, 15 years worth of gaps in their national insurance records. Now, the great thing is you can go back and make historic payments. I think you can go back 4 years. I might need to fact check that one. But you can go back X amount of years and make some contributions to make that up. But that is essentially the state pension, very separate to your private or employer pension that you are contributing towards, that you can access at another stage.
Yeah. You bring up such a great point, especially for women to think about if they're taking that time out, or anyone really, especially if maybe they're unwell for a period in their life and they didn't think that it will actually affect their pension. There's loads of things, or went traveling and didn't think to also contribute towards their NI. And as you said, they find out so late. Now you're at retirement age, you can't kind of backtrack that. But yes, that is the state pension. And you also have private pension. I was just thinking about maybe myself now that I am a business owner. I am in charge of all my finances, making sure I pay all the tax as well. For self-employed people, is there something that they could do to make sure that they're covered when they get to the pension age?
Yeah, this is such a real one. Like myself, when I moved from being in employment to self-employment, I did not think about my pension for the first 2 years at all. Well, I thought about it enough to remember to make my national insurance contributions. But in terms of my private pension, I guess I hadn't even, you're trying to get your business off the ground. You're thinking about a million things, wearing different hats. And I'll be honest, pension was the last thing on my mind. And then I genuinely woke up in the middle of the night, like 2 years into running my business, thinking, wait, my employer used to pay into my pension. No one's been paying into my pension for 2 years. And that's what
Yes.
spurred a quick jump start on getting my pension journey started as a self-employed person. And it's quite daunting at first. You just don't really know where to start. But I realized very quickly that there were so many tax benefits as a self-employed person to be contributing to my pension. So with my street food business, at the time I was a sole trader, self-employed business. And so I found that if I made any personal private contributions to a pension, that the government would give tax relief, which is essentially a top-up. So if you are a basic rate taxpayer, the government, you could put in £80 they top it up by £20, then you've got £100 in your pension. This is the bit that I think people forget. With all the tax breaks or different schemes available, pensions are kind of free money. And I think if they rebranded pensions as how do I buy some free money, people might be a lot more interested and switch off less than if you just said, I'm going to talk to you about pensions for the next hour, right? But by you putting in, the government tops it up for free. And then if you are a higher rate or an additional rate taxpayer, you get that bumper, plus you get to claim additional amounts as tax relief. So again, free money for your future self is the way you think about it. Of course, you've got to be in it and contributing to access that extra free money. But when you think about it like that, it's really something that you want to be doing. On limited company side of things, I know a lot of small business owners register as a limited company. The great news is that private pension contributions, or what I guess I should call them employer contributions, because your limited company becomes your employer, can make contributions into your pension, and that is corporation tax deductible. So the government are basically giving lots of generous, I guess, tax incentives to get people to pay into their pension, mainly because I think they fully understand that pension poverty costs the state a lot of money, that actually if people can get hold of their finances and harness them, and are encouraged to do so, they will and should. But I can't bring that point up without noting the recent budget, the recent autumn budget that Rachel Reeves announced. I think it was last month now, whereby for the first time, actually, pensions had always previously been the most tax efficient thing you could ever do with your money. But a new caveat came in place, that starting from 2027, pensions will no longer be outside of the scope of inheritance tax, meaning it will form part of inheritance tax estates in future. So it's still super tax efficient, free money for future you. Don't not think about that. But for the first time, it's, I guess, been brought down one peg in the tax efficiency matrix, because it is now taxable with inheritance tax. But that said, whether you're a self-employed sole trader looking to add contributions and have government top-ups, or a limited company director looking to make contributions and reduce your corporation tax, it's super tax efficient. And tax efficiencies aside, you want to be planning for your future.
Yes, there's win-win-win all ends in terms of making sure that you've covered yourself, firstly, when you get to that stage, as well as the tax efficiency, as you mentioned. And I think a lot of business owners don't fully understand all the elements. So thank you for explaining it from a sole trader perspective. And if you've got a limited company, if you're a director, because I think we forget sometimes, we're always thinking about the tax that they have to pay, but actually there's loads of ways that you can make sure that you've maneuvered it a little bit in there. So thank you for explaining that so clearly and with so much color, because that is your brand. So I love it. I also wanted to then touch on, because I've been talking to a few providers, especially to set up my own personal pension. So I'm going to have a SIP account, and I'm just doing a little bit of research. Still doing a little bit of research, but I would like to make sure that my pension is looked after. And then I'm also going to set up a pension through the limited company, simply because I feel like yourself. I just woke up and I was like, hold on a minute. I was having quite a lot contributed towards my pension before, and now no one's looking after that. So that's definitely at the top of my list. In terms of other questions that were put through, because we asked people on social media, when we've got a subject that's going to come up, if they have any specific questions that they would like to ask an expert. And the next one was, how much should I contribute to my pension? Is there a way that people can kind of try and figure this out?
Yeah. So, as always, anything I suggest here is not intended to address your individual requirements, but is general, kind of a general steer, I would say. Whenever I tell people this strategy, it feels incredibly overwhelming and people get very scared. I'm going to caveat it with that before and then I'm going to tell you it, and then I'm going to tell you how you can break it down. What
Okay.
they say is if you want a comfortable retirement, kind of in line with your current earnings, what they say is you should invest half your age as a percentage of your income into your pension. So if you are 20 years old, you should be putting 10% of your income into your pension to grow. If you are 30, you should be putting in 15%. If you are 40, you should be putting in 20%. Now, I think we can all agree that 20%, 15%, 10%, to be honest, even 5% of your annual income is a lot of money and is not very easy for a lot of people to do and achieve. However, the point being is the earlier you get started, you keep the half your age as a percent at that level, meaning if you get started on your pension investment journey age 18, then you need to be putting in 9%, and that 9% stays consistent for your life. If you don't look at your pensions at all and bury your head in the sand about it and decide to start looking at this age 60, 8 years before retirement, then you're going to need to put in 30% of your income every year until you retire. And so the point here is the earlier you start, the less you have to put in. But let's say you are 32 years old and you decide to start taking your pension journey seriously then. What I'm basically saying is you're supposed to put in 16% of your income, which is a lot of money for a lot of people, especially if you live in a large city like London, Manchester. Rates are going up, it's rents are going up. It's hard to have 16% of your income free to just put away and lock away that you're not going to touch until you're in your 60s or 70s, right? But the thing to remember is, especially if you are in employment, so unlike you and I, Arlyne, we're having to kind of work it out. People who are in employment, often your employer is contributing on your behalf as well. And so many people standardly get put into auto enrollment schemes where perhaps they put in 5%, their employer puts in 3%. Well, you're at 8% with only having to do 5%, right? And in some cases, many employers that want to have competitive packages and attract the best talent, they'll offer something called matched funding. So let's say you are 32 years old, like I said, using the same example. In your head, you're like, okay, 16% needs to go away to my pension. Well, maybe you can achieve that by putting in just 8%. And if you have an employer that is generously matching that 8%, 8 plus 8 is 16%, free money from somebody else, are you putting in and maxing out your contributions? Your employer might max it out, and then you are hitting that 16% or 10%, whatever that percent is, to build up in your pension pot. And so that is the statistic. That is the general strategy that a lot of people employ. It's a scary strategy. It's not always attainable. But I think if you at least have it as an anchor, let's say let's say you're 20, half your age is 10%, but you're only able to contribute 7%, but you at least know you're meant to be getting to 10. It is anchoring it rather than doing nothing and just sticking it, at 3% and doing nothing at all, right? The other thing I would caveat on this point is that is presuming that you have no other retirement strategy whatsoever. That's kind of if you're relying on pensions and pensions alone. But I would say, like any investment, it's really important to diversify. So maybe you might invest in property. You might invest in starting a business that you can sell at a later stage in life. You might invest in fine art. There are so many things that you can invest in and think about your retirement strategy that doesn't have to be just pensions. And one thing that's really important to note is when you draw down your pension, it is treated as normal taxable income. And so one thing that I think is really important to discuss alongside having your pension strategy is your other retirement strategy. And this is where ISAs are fantastic. ISAs are basically tax-free products that people can put their money into, either as savings or investments. You can get cash ISAs, stocks and shares ISAs, lifetime ISAs. In fact, the lifetime ISA outside of the property element is literally designed to help people save money for later in life because you can't access it till you're in your 50s. These are ways that you can put money into pots that can grow either through savings interest or fluctuations in the stock market. And then when you take that money out, it is always tax-free. So I think a really sensible strategy, as well as paying into your pension, is thinking about how you supplement your pension income as well. So it's not a one-size-fits-all approach. Everyone will have different ways of looking at this. But at the very minimum, try and target half your age as a percentage when you get started on your pension journey, and then think and explore other ways in which you can build wealth and income for later in life.
Yeah, great point. I mean, if you work out that you need to save that 16%, fine, maybe 10% can go towards your pension, and then the rest goes towards something else that you might be interested in investing. But yeah, great points there. And I was just thinking of the numbers. I mean, let's just think, if I want to keep my lifestyle, I believe that would be maybe 2,500 outside of like rent or anything. Hopefully I would have paid off my own property. But yeah, if I want £2,500 per month, then I need to have that saved in my pension. So you can also try to work it back to see if that the percentage is going to meet how much you actually need after you're retired. I mean, you take that with a grain of salt, because how long are you actually going to live? Therefore, how much do you need in the bank? But I think it's a great way to just kind of compare the two and just kind of think realistically, how much do I need? So you can start to make the steps towards the right direction. But thanks for sharing what people could do. And people could actually use this as a negotiation tactic when they're starting a new job. Maybe they can ask their
100%.
And 1 year as well, whilst I was working for a telco, they asked if we want our bonus to be put towards pensions because, again, it's more efficient tax-wise. At that time, I chose to put just a percentage into my pension, and I'm quite proud of that because this was money that I hadn't had expected anyway. So that could be something that people could consider. If they do get a bonus, it could go towards their pension.
Absolutely. And something you actually said just before did make me think, with pensions, you make the point, how much do I need? Because nobody knows how long they're going to be alive for, right? But
Yeah.
what I would say is, as long as you're not planning on kind of kicking it as soon as possible, you want to think about this kind of stuff because if you think you're going to live to 70 and you maybe get to 100, that's 30 years of unplanned for time. You're probably not going to be able to go out and get a job as a builder age 91, are you? So it's really
Don't want
important.
to.
But I also bring this up because the genes in my family, like people in my family live into their 90s, their 100s, and if my genes are anything to go by, it has just shown me I need to be taking my pension seriously. I obviously, I have no control on when my time is, but if my family gene pool is anything to go by, I'm taking my pension very, very seriously.
Good. That's the best way that you can try and estimate it. And I want to be on a holiday. So I want to make sure that I've set up, my next life to be as amazing as it could be, because you're not working at that point and you want to make sure that you've done everything that is within your control, at least to make sure that you've got the finances to cover the type of lifestyle that you'd like.
Absolutely. And, that's the other thing. I think the way we talk about age, um, especially in Western societies, just doesn't seem to like revere and respect age in the way that it maybe does in other cultures. And I
Mm,
do get the impression that a lot of young people think that they think once you're 30, you're over the hill. So but, I think that once you stop working and you're retired, they literally think, do you just sit there knitting for the rest of your life? And if you love knitting, go do you. But I want to be one of those grannies that's on a cruise ship in the Caribbean or the Mediterranean twice a year. I'm going to be living my best life with my free bus pass, going all up and down everywhere. And those things cost money. So, yeah, it's really important to plan. And I always say this, not just plan, but dedicate resources. And by resources, I mean time, effort, energy, and money.
mhm.
Dedicate resources to the life that you actually want to live. Because I don't think enough people do that. I think life happens, but you can dedicate resources to the life that you actually want to live. And that's so, so important.
Absolutely love that. I'm writing that down. Dedicate resources to the life that you want to live. I think that should be the name of this conversation because I think we expect some things from life, but if you haven't put in that effort, then you can't just expect it. But if you dedicate those resources, you're going in the right direction. So that is the word, that is the quote. Thank you very much. So another question, a little bit technical, that was asked is, would you know what the difference is between defined benefit and defined contribution pension?
Yes. So the defined benefit is what I refer to as the stuff of legend. These mythical pensions that don't really seem to exist anymore, but did for my parents. Now, my parents are boomers. And I wouldn't say that this existed for all boomers, but just giving you genuine context. So my mum, her first ever job when she left school is the same company that she was still working for when she retired. So because of that,
Mm,
that back in, it must have been the 70s for her. Back then, that was when she signed a contract. That was the golden age of contracts, whereby she had what's called a final salary pension. And what that means is the company had promised its employees at that time that they would receive a pension for life when they retired based on some kind of percentage proportion of whatever their final salary was, without them, the employee, having to make any contributions themselves. Now, I do believe that that changed slightly with the contract terms later on, but I'm just anchoring in the 70s when she signed this contract. That is what it stipulated. And that was normal. That was just, you didn't need to put in anything. The company you worked for would pay your pension when you left. And typically people would stay and be loyal and stay with the same company for those, safety nets and those reasons. And it kind of built in this loyalty. However, the fact of the matter is people started living much longer than predictions had suggested. And whereas previously, it sounds really morbid, but people would retire back in those days and they'd maybe be around for like 8 or 10 years. But people were sticking around for 30 years, in some cases 40 years, living their best lives, having their golden pension paid for. And very quickly,
with
some
those
of the
good genes.
yeah, people with those good genes. And these companies found that their largest liability, their largest outgoing by a huge stretch, was paying the pensions of people who hadn't even been working at the company for the last 20, 25, 30 years. And it very quickly became, unsurprisingly, unsustainable because any free cash they had wasn't able to go on innovation and investing in new markets and training up and their brand new teams. It was going entirely on some boomers' pensions, basically. Well, the general generation before them. So unsurprisingly, maybe there are some companies that still offer it, but unsurprisingly, it's the stuff of myth, the stuff of legend that
Right.
our generation and generations below are unlikely to experience. So a defined contribution instead is how this evolved, where people realized it was very important to still plan for retirement, and that retirement was very much linked to your work and your income and your service that you did with the company. But instead, has moved to what a lot of us will probably recognize if you have been employed, is that you would make a contribution yourself, like a percentage from your payslip, and your employer would match that contribution. And that defined contribution might be you put in 3%, sorry, you put in 5%, we put in 3%. You put in 5%, we put in 5%, whatever that might be. But it's like a defined percentage proportion that you're going to put in to help save and build that pot up for later in life. Whereas the defined benefit was just, here's a magic golden pension. So that's the those two. I don't think many people are going to come across a defined benefit in this day and age. But if you do, pat yourself on the back. You've got
No.
it.
Yeah. Yes, I think I only came across it really when it as an accountant when we were treating different people differently in terms of like the forecasts for pensions. So, but it is something that is talked about quite often sometimes on the news, and I think it wasn't clear exactly which one's which. So thank you for explaining that. And I think this kind of leads lovely into if people can have different pensions, because if you're moving from job to job, you were just talking back in the day, someone will be in a role for about 40 years with the same company. But these days, people are moving companies every couple of years on average. That means that they could have different pension providers. Is this something that they should be worried about? Is this something that they should try and have just one pension pot? Do you have any views on that?
Yeah, I think there's no right or wrong way to like look at your different pots, but there is definitely one wrong approach, and that is if you have worked somewhere and you were contributing into a pension and that employer was contributing into that pension and you're no longer with that company and you're not currently contributing into that pension, the worst thing you could do is just leave it there doing nothing, right? And the reason being is if the average person tends to move job every 4 or 5 years, probably even more these days, right? Because of the
Yeah.
shortness of service, there's probably not a huge amount built up at these pots. So rather than having a nice big pension or maybe two nice big pensions, people are finding themselves with like dozens of tiny little pensions here and there. And quite frankly, if you put £100 in the bank and left it for like 10 years, the return wouldn't be that great. You'd be getting some interest, but you'd probably come back in 10 years' time and see that rather than £100, that you had like £105, for example. And that's probably me being generous. However, if you put in £1 million in and left it for that time, obviously the interest, even if it's a tiny percentage, a small percentage on a large amount, is going to be building something up. So the whole point here is you're going to want to, if possible, especially if you've got dozens of pensions lying around, is try to amalgamate some of them, not necessarily all of them. I don't believe you should have all of your eggs in one basket. Maybe have 2 or 3 pensions, perhaps. But in a meaningful way, you want to have at least one pot that is really growing. So it's really important to find those old pensions and realize, I think there's a lot of language with pensions that people think it's their employer that owns it. It's your pension. They set it up on your behalf.
Mm,
It's your
mm,
pension. It's your account. You have access to it. Most people don't log into their pension account, but it is yours to log into, to look at, to see. You can pick what risk profile you want. Maybe you want it to be super risky so that you can hopefully benefit from a larger pot at the end. Might be some risk that it might be smaller. Maybe you have no risk appetite. and you want to have a really low risk fund. Maybe you want to pick a fund that aligns with your ethics, maybe a green, sustainable fund. Maybe you want a Sharia fund that helps align with Islamic faith. So, for example, doesn't invest in pork or pig products or tobacco and alcohol, things like that. It's your money to do with what you want. And if you sit back and do nothing, it's just going to be sat in some default pot that you've never picked, that's one size fits most. You're not most people, and kind of doing nothing. And so there are certain tools, like Pension Bee, that do all the legwork for you to like find your old pensions and bring them together. You can also do this yourself manually, but there are often long lead times, a lot of admin, and a lot of fees associated with doing so. But there is nothing worse than just leaving them there and doing nothing. Like, just imagine like having like £100 sat in 10 different pots doing absolutely nothing. You could bring it all together and maybe have £10,000 that is starting to grow. It's obviously going to be so much more meaningful than just leaving tiny pots around doing nothing.
And it's easier to track, right? If you've got all these different providers.
Yeah, definitely. And also, you're right, because it's about tracking. And I think a lot of people think they're always different, but actually, I believe, might need to fact check this as well, but I believe Nest is like the largest pension provider in the UK, or one of the larger ones for auto enrollment and employment. And so actually often you might have a Nest account with one employer, leave, get a job, go somewhere else and get put into another pension scheme. And then in your third job, maybe they're with Nest, and actually they'll just, if you give them the correct details, national insurance number, same address, or you might need to call them if you've changed address, they'll then just start putting it into your original Nest pot. So it is your pot and not the employer's. And possibly some of your employers might use the same provider. So I have, in some instances, asked somebody to go and check, because they changed job 3 times, that they definitely had pensions lying around. And by chance, all 3 of their employers happened to be with the same pension provider. So they actually didn't need to do that.
What a coincidence.
Oh, the total coincidence. So they were lucky in that regard. But what they did find out was that one of the employers had put their middle name rather than their surname or something like that. And so actually it had created a separate pot altogether. So there was actually still an exercise to be done. And eventually, I think it took a little bit of paperwork and back and forth, but managed to amalgamate them all together. So if you do one thing today, please try and find your old pensions. And if you're struggling with it, just keep at it, because if they're lying around doing nothing, you're not going to be on the fun international cruise with me and Arlyne when we retire.
Sipping on our cocktails.
Exactly. Good.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for sharing that. And last question. It feels like a morbid question, but can you advise what happens to someone's pension when they pass away? I think you touched on it when we were talking about the new budget that's just come out, but is there any kind of advice, support, or guidance in terms of what will happen to someone's pension after they pass away?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And I actually would say I'm maybe not the best subject matter expertise on this particular area, because this is more than just pensions. It's sort of just around sort of estate planning is what it's called when somebody passes, right?
Mm-hmm.
However, one thing that I would say that catches a lot of people out is on your pension, whether that's your defined benefit for those lucky people that have it, or your private pension, employer pension, is you can name a beneficiary of that pension. And it's really important to do so, because lots of people, we live in a world where lots of people are cohabiting, they're not married, they've been together 30 plus 40, 50 years. And if you don't write the specific names down as a beneficiary, that pension could go elsewhere within your estate. So the first things I would say is, if we're talking about what happens when you pass away, let's talk about what you should be doing whilst you're alive, right? First of all is naming your beneficiaries pension. Secondly, up until the very recent announcement, pensions were always outside of the scope of inheritance tax, and therefore it was often deemed as something that will get passed on tax-free to your loved ones who are named. That is changing now. It would always be passed on tax-free if you died before the age of 75. There were some tax implications for after 75. From 2027, I believe, this will change and it will form part of your inheritance tax estate. I think inheritance tax is a very emotional topic, and as at the time of recording, there's a lot of unrest at the moment with farmers and inheritance tax and farmland. I think it's so emotive because it's surrounded by grief and death. But one thing I would say is there are like high thresholds before you start paying inheritance tax. And so if you leave a pension of let's say 60k, plus you have lots of older people downsize, plus you have an apartment worth let's say 300k, then that's 360k worth of I guess estate value left. You actually don't pay inheritance tax in full. You pay it over, and I'm sure the thresholds have probably changed, so we might need to fact check this bit as well. But I believe it's over 325k, so you'd be paying a percentage above that amount, not the full amount. And so I say this to not annoy people about inheritance tax, but to make sure people have conversations, it's really important to have conversations. You don't want to get blindsided by these things, especially if you're on the cusp of being in the level where you pay versus not. But the number one thing relating this back to pensions specifically is make sure you name the beneficiaries of your pension. By not doing so, it could go to somebody that you don't want it to, basically. Yeah. But adding one final point to maybe bring it to life a bit is I genuinely think pensions are there to be spent, right? Spend it while you're alive.
Yes.
Be the 85-year-old that decides to go bungee jumping. Like, if life is for living and your pension is meant to be your money for you to see out, your last quarter on this earth,
Your last hurrah.
So
Yes.
as somebody who loves to be a deep saver and a deep investor, I cannot wait to be big spendy Wendy when I'm retired.
As I said, see you on the beach. We'll be having fun. Exactly.
Exactly.
Oh, thank you so much. I mean, you've taken a subject that a lot of people could see as a gray, doom and gloom. I don't want to think about, that time of my life. And you brought it to life. I love that as well when you use that phrase. I think it's really important to think about your finances practically in a way, make it fun rather than it's a boring subject. That way it's demystifying it. So thank you for just kind of explaining everything so clearly and using terms that people can understand. So those are all the questions that were put in. My final question is a little bit about what's to come from you. Is there anything that you'd like people to come and enjoy, either on your platforms or events? Feel free to plug.
Oh, a sneaky plug. Well, to be honest, we are winding down this side of the year, but we would just love to make sure that we can help debunk and demystify personal or business finances for as many people as possible. So please stay in touch. You can find us at Coco Financial, that's COCO Financial, on Instagram. And we also check out our website, cocofinancial.co.uk. Just to be part of the community, we'll announce any 2025 events that will be coming up. I'm sure we'll have some exciting things for Women's Month and plenty of other events happening very soon. But whilst we wind down for Christmas, just stay in touch. We would love to wave our financial fairy godmother wands over anybody that is looking to learn some more. So thank you so much for having me, Arlyne. It's been such an enjoyable conversation. Vengeance.
about pensions. Exactly. I feel like that was fun. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye.
Okay. I'll stop recording. That is all for us today, guys. Join us next week for some more seeds to sow. And please remember to support us by following and leave a rating on our show on whichever platform you're listening to us from. To those watching on YouTube, please leave a like and a subscribe to our channel. All of your support goes a long way. Thank you so much for joining us today. And remember, keep shining.